Welcome everyone. We're here at the Litho, Li. How do you say that word again?
Lithostrotos.
Right. Thank you, Sam. Now, what does it mean?
Well, in Greek it means the pavement, and actually it's only mentioned once in the Bible in John chapter 19 verse 13 when John wrote about Jesus' trial before Pilate. Later, when archaeologists dug below the Via Dolorosa, they found these paving stones and thought they had discovered the exact place.
I can see why they would have thought that. I mean, just look at these carvings.
Yes, some of the carvings were made to give traction, so horses wouldn't slip as they walked across the smooth stones. Also, off-duty soldiers carved games into the paving to help them pass time.
Look at the circular one here. It has a crown and a letter B carved onto it.
That B letter stands for the word Basileus, which means king in Greek, and so this is called a game of kings.
You know, in this game, the main playing piece is a prisoner who is mocked as if he were a pretend king. Actually, it's very much like what happened to Jesus in Mark 15, verses 16 to 20. The soldiers put a royal robe on him, beat him, and put a crown of sharp thorns on his head, and mocked him by calling him king.
Wow, it just goes to show how strongly our games and entertainment can influence our actions. But I'm guessing that isn't the actual place where Jesus was condemned.
You're right, David, it isn't. Archaeologists now know that this paved area was built by the Emperor Hadrian 100 years after the crucifixion.
Back to the subject. It's still hard to imagine that anyone would want to hurt Jesus. I mean, he did so much for people. How is it possible that he could have any enemies?
Well, Jesus' own words in John 15:25 say it best. They hated me without a cause. Jesus healed the sick, raised the dead, fed the hungry, was a friend to the lonely, and the list goes on and on. There really was no reason for Jesus to have even one enemy, let alone so many. Did you know that Psalm 69 verse 4 prophesied that the enemies of Jesus would be more than the hairs of his head?
Oh, that's too many to count. So what you're saying is that in order for Jesus to have enemies, the people had to make up reasons to hate him.
Exactly. They twisted his good works so people would think he was a lawbreaker. They did what Isaiah 5:20 said should never be done by calling evil good and good evil. Their jealousy and lies built up a wall of separation so that Jesus was not their friend or even a welcome member of the Israelite nation, but an outsider, a stranger.
That's sad because Israel had a habit of treating strangers with suspicion. Israelites never really trusted outsiders or even tried much to tell the Gentiles about the God of Israel.
Yes, you're right, Sam. I believe it's part of the Am Segula mindset. You know, the belief that they are the treasured people of God.
Yes, Deuteronomy 26:18 does mention that the Jewish nation was a special people who were set apart from the other nations because they had the law of God. But they were supposed to share God's law with the other nations, not keep it a secret.
Hey, I know we've been to the temple before, but let's go back. There's something I want to talk about there. Did you know that Jesus cleansed the temple 2 times? during his ministry. The first was at the beginning of his ministry, shortly after the wedding of Cana, and the second cleansing happened only 5 days before he was crucified.
That's right, Sam. And when the priests and rulers spoke with Jesus afterwards, he said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." They thought he was speaking of their temple, which had taken 46 long years to build. But he wasn't. He was speaking about himself. Within 3 days' time, he would die on the cross, be buried, and on the third day rise again. His death would end the sacrifice system in the temple and their business opportunities as well.
I see. They hated Jesus because his teachings threatened their way of making money. It seems to me that another reason why Jesus had so many enemies was because he really lived the way God had told his people to live.
You're right. Romans 15:3 tells us that Jesus never tried to please himself, but tried to please God in everything he said, thought, and did.
I can imagine that his example would have pricked their conscience because of their behavior.
Oh, it did. Because those who sold the animals for the sacrifices for high prices polluted the temple with their greed and changed God's house of worship into a noisy marketplace. By chasing out the businesses from the temple, Jesus showed that his temple is a place for worship and not for business. But those business owners became very angry.
Right. They even started making plans to kill him. But how could they be God's people, the chosen sons of Abraham, and at the same time plot to kill the Messiah?
You know, for many years the people of God had been going farther and farther away from his law. They followed the traditions and customs of men more than the law of God. They claimed to be Abraham's children, but didn't act like him. Abraham had been faithful to God and was called the friend of God. Time was running out for them to remain the children of God.
Another thing, this second cleansing pointed to the soon coming judgment of God upon the Jewish nation. Just like the sellers who ran when Jesus knocked down their tables, God's people would soon be scattered throughout the world.
And even though Jesus didn't hurt a single person in the temple, the people were terrified by the holiness they saw in his face. At that moment, the power of God flashed through the humanity of Jesus, and the people felt their guilt.
I can't imagine how hard it must have been for Jesus while he was here on earth. He did so much for us, and still he was hated, rejected, and alone. I often wonder why he ever chose to become our Savior.
It's because he loves us, David. Heaven would no longer be happy for him if we couldn't be there.
That's a love I can't understand. I can only thank him for it. Hey, for our project today, let's write and decorate thank you letters to God for everything Jesus did to save us. After you've finished, read your letter to the class so others can read them too. Finally, on your mind maps, write the words rejected of men. Bye-bye.